In it here now, what are you gonna do now? I'm gonna bid on here now. Who bid $500,000 bid?
Welcome to the Legacy of Agriculture. This program will explore the past, present, and future of agriculture. We'll look at the people, products, and events that have formed its history. And now, with today's guest, your host, Chris Bair.
Good morning, everybody. This is Chris Bair, your host of the Legacy of Agriculture. We appreciate you joining us on WNAX Radio. We're located right here in southeastern South Dakota, covering a very large area. And if you missed any of our broadcasts from the last year and a half, you can go to Apple, Spotify, or the legacyofagriculture.com website and pick up any of our archived shows that you want to listen to. There's lots of interesting shows covering all different types of topics. And today I am visiting, and my guest and good friend Jim Sabe from western North Dakota. I can almost say South Dakota too, because you're right down there on the very southwestern corner of North Dakota. And I always get my North Dakotas and South Dakotas mixed up, Jim. So don't go crazy on me, Jay.
I won't be. I grew up 4 miles from South Dakota. Our ranch was right down in the corner. So I was 4 miles from South Dakota and 40 from Montana. So I'm right in the corner.
But my first question is if you grew up 4 miles from the South Dakota border when you were a teenager, how often did you have to make a run for the South Dakota border to get away from the North Dakota Highway Patrol?
Well, it wasn't much getting in the way. Is that South Dakota was 19 for drinking and North Dakota was 21. And so when everybody hit 19, you were going to Ludlow, South Dakota to maybe pick up a beverage or two and then come back.
We just won't go down that road this morning, will we, Jim?
No, it's all part about growing up. And you know what? I was glad I was in the North Dakota side. But I have a lot of great friends right across the border, and a lot of them went to high school in Scranton. And so they lived across the border, but it was closer to go to Scranton. I think it was 50 miles to Buffalo or 42 to Scranton. So they came up to Scranton to school. And so it was great growing up down there.
For 5 years, I lived southwest of Grand Forks, North Dakota, and I grew up in the Rocky Mountains where it got cold. Trust me, it got cold, but we didn't have the humidity. And when I moved to North Dakota and lived in North Dakota for 5 years, I learned what cold means.
Oh, it's ugly up there. It is. I'm lucky we live down in the southwest corner because our weather's a lot like the Spearfish or the Black Hills or Billings, Montana. We can be, Grand Forks can be 30 below and we could be 20 above down here. It's just unbelievable the difference what that makes over there. And you can see the end of the earth from there. I know you can.
So, hey, speaking of weather, how cold was it yesterday morning?
We hit, I think it was 25 below, 23 below, something like that. And that was 2 mornings ago. And then yesterday we were about 0, ended up being 30 for today or yesterday. And this morning when I'm driving to my office at a little after 6, we're 25 degrees and the wind blowing 40 miles an hour and trying to snow. So it's a different scenario.
So speaking of yesterday, tell me about the Murnack Ranch's cattle auction, that purebred auction that they had. You guys had sold replacement heifers, you had sold bred heifers, you'd sold bulls. For all of our listeners out there, Murnacks are one of the nation's leading purebred heifer growers in the country. Tell us how the auction went.
All right, and I'm going to just prelude that in a minute, but in our office here in Bowman, Andy is with the Murnack Herefords. John Sorority, he grew up with the Sorority Charlet Ranch, and then my daughter and son-in-law, they sell Red Angus. So we're all involved in the cattle business very deeply. But the Murnacks, they held their 58th annual bull sale. Their grandpa Jim, I remember him years ago, but there was years where they couldn't hardly give bulls away. It was very tough. A lot of years where there's no money in the country. They've survived. Brent Murnack, Andy's brother, is kind of the guru of the place. They run farming and ranching right south of town here, about 5 miles on 85. But they run this purebred Hereford business that is by far probably one of the best in the nation. And they like to show cattle too. Andy and Brent went all over the country showing cattle. And now Brent's boys, he's got 4 boys, and he's got a set of triplets in there. So that place has been busy, but now those boys are promoting the business just like Brent and Andy did, and Terry Murnock, Andy's dad, and then Jim Murnock. And so these guys have they made full circle. But when you see the sale they had yesterday, and like I said, I've been to many auction sales. I've been to some big ones where, like Schaff's Angus Valley Ranch, where they sell a $1 million bull. And so we've all been to that. But this one here was local. And yesterday, and I'm going to give you just the report what I got last night, but 14 fall yearling bulls averaged almost $13,000 a bull. 85 2-year-old bulls, because Murnock sell 2-year-old Hereford bulls, horned, and some polled now. They averaged 10,369. So the total on about 100 bulls was $10,750 a bull, which is tremendous. We know the markets are great. The lowest cattle numbers in history in the United States. But then they sold some registered bred heifers, which come to about $8,800 a piece. And then 317 commercial F1, which is a baldy cross, a Hereford on a black cow, and they sold them the heifer calves. Now they got a year yet before they even have a baby at $2,350 a head. And then we look down here, there's 28 commercial heifers, bred heifers. They're commercial Herefords. Now they're not registered, but they brought $4,200 a piece. And then there was another group of 63 commercial F1 bred heifers, baldies, that brought $3,500 a piece. The top selling bull yesterday was $40,000. But what was unique about this sale, usually they have the top bulls in the beginning, and then you go down from there. And everybody always says, this is the best set of bulls we've ever brought to town. Yesterday proved that. It was the best set of bulls from number 1 to number 98 or 100. The 30th bull was the $40,000 bull. But they put them in pens, comparing the, having the same kind of the genetics, and they put all them and when they opened a new pen, all of a sudden the bulls would be up to $16,000 to $25,000 a piece. And then they go down to, I think the lowest selling bull was $7,500 yesterday. But you look at that from top to bottom, these things were probably the best set of bulls I've ever seen. Now, I'm partial to Red Angus, but these Hereford bulls from top to bottom were unbelievable. And they went all over the United States. I mean, they're going to Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri. I know they're going into Colorado, South Dakota. Wyoming is huge for them. And then the locals, I mean, the local, they're supported by the locals very well. Guys like to have these Hereford bulls on these black cows to produce these heifers. Well, when you can sell a bull for $10,000 and a guy buys it and all of a sudden he's getting $2,300 heifers from that bull, it don't take long to pay for that bull that you purchased. And you want to buy the best genetics you can. And I'm not standing on my soapbox here, but us here in cattle country, we do know something about good genetics. And whether it's the Murnocks and the Sorites or my daughter's place, Dry Creek, Red Angus, but we got a lot of purebred breeders right here. We got Brookses and Stuber Herefords. I mean, it's just a lot of great breeders. We have some of the best genetics in the world right here, and they will work anywhere in the world. So again, congratulations to the Murnock Ranch, their 58th annual. It was a barn burner here in Bowman, a great facility, 25, 30 degrees yesterday, a little windy, but it was a beautiful day for the sale.
Thank you, Jim. We're down to the end of our first segment. We're going to be right back after a commercial break.
Hi, this is Jasmine at Pfeiffer's Auction, Realty and Land Management. Pfeiffer's offers multiple ways to bid and buy at our equipment and land auctions. You can bid online, in person, or place pre-bids before the sale even starts. By providing convenient bidding platforms, we make sure that you can buy the items or parcels you want the way you want to. Visit Pfeiffer's.com to see a complete list of our auctions. When it comes to bidding, go with Pfeiffer's. Nobody does it better.
Folks, this is Chris Bair, your host of the Legacy of Agriculture. My friend, good friend, and coworker Jim Sabe from our Bowman, North Dakota office is my guest on the Legacy of Agriculture. Jim, thank you very much for taking time out of a very, very busy schedule to join us on the Legacy of Agriculture. We had a very brisk first segment talking about the Murdoch Ranch's cattle sale that they had yesterday and record-breaking numbers. Jim, the one question that I want to ask coming into the second segment is all fall, we have seen record-breaking cattle prices. We know that inventories are way down. Demand for beef worldwide is way up. What does your crystal ball tell us for the cattle industry over the next 1 to 5 years?
Well, a lot of it depends on our imports, and right now we still get a blockage on the southern border of the Mexican cattle that can't come in because of a tapeworm or a worm in their cattle. So it's going to be good. It still takes time, and especially in the cattle business, to build the numbers back up. You know, it's not like sheep or pigs or whatever where you can double a herd and within a year and a half. It takes a lot of time, or even a full year, but it takes a lot of time with livestock, and you got to get the right genetics. Guys are doing it right, but we're hoping that we've got at least another 4 or 5 years of this. It really depends on how our borders open up with the exports coming in, but there's a big demand. But I think the biggest thing that's going to put a halt to the markets going up anymore is the consumer in the grocery store. When things start getting too high for them to purchase, you're going to see pork and chicken really skyrocket. But I think we need to hold this beef in check. But people still look for a good steak. They still look for good hamburger, and we're producing that right now. And so I'm hoping we got at least another 3, 4, 5 years, and maybe longer. Who knows? I don't think this is a new norm, but there's no way we can build our herd back. It's going to take 5 to 8, 10 years to get us back to where we can at least manage what's going on.
And I think that you're exactly right. And one of the things that has been to the livestock producers' advantage has been that corn prices and soybean prices have been a little bit tough for our row crop guys over the last 18 months to 2 years. And even though hay prices and feed prices have been high, when you have lower corn prices, that really helps our livestock producers as well. Would you agree?
I do. And we're I shouldn't say very fortunate, but I mean, there's a lot of $3 corn out here, $3.50 corn that guys are buying and gobbling up. And you look at even the hay prices out here. We've got an open winter here again this year, like last year. So the hay prices aren't like they were a year and a half ago or 2 years ago when we're hitting $135 to $150 a ton. Some places almost $200 a ton for hay going to these mama cows out there to be fed. Now my kids are still grazing out in cornfields. They've only fed about 10 bales of hay this year, which are very fortunate. So our hay prices come down. All the commodities going into feeding cattle have come down quite a bit. So there is an opportunity to make some money. I just hope that these ranchers are going to be the ones making the majority, because they take the biggest brunt of everything, whether it's storms or low prices or health situations. They take a beating at times.
Absolutely. And weather too. Weather plays such an important factor, especially this time of year as we're coming into the calving season. Right here at Pfeiffer, south of Sioux Falls, Jim, the one thing that I have noticed is 3 and 4 years ago. Now, those listeners that don't realize this, but I-29 runs right past our front door here at Pfeiffer's in Sioux Falls. And it's a major thoroughfare from Winnipeg all the way down to Kansas City. And then I-90, just about 20 miles north of us, runs from Chicago to Seattle. So there's two things that we get to see on a regular basis. The amount of new farm machinery that's moving from the factories up into the Pacific Northwest. And the other thing that we observe all the time, because we're not too far from some of the processing plants, is the amount of cattle and hogs that are moving from the north down into either our feed yards or moving to processing plants. And the one thing that I have noticed the last couple of years, Jim, is that we're not seeing the number of loaded semis that are hauling fat cattle to the processor. As a matter of fact, Tyson, who is a major processor that is just 30 miles or about 60 miles south of us, you don't see the amount of cattle going into these processing plants that you did 3 years ago.
No, and we're seeing that out here. There's a lot of fat cattle being fed, grown, fattened, go to the local processor and being sold. Now, my kids have sold meat all over the upper Midwest right off their ranch. And now that's not taking a big, taking a big thing out of the market, but you get to every place and people are doing that. Here in our southwest corner of North Dakota and into Montana and South Dakota, it's huge for people to sell full beef right off their place and get it processed here and ship it out. I know my kids have sent stuff to Pennsylvania and down into Florida. So, I mean, it's done that way. And like I said, it's not really hurting the packers as much as a guy would think. But there's still a lot of cattle being processed locally anymore and done that way. So we see the cattle sometimes leaving our place, but we've got a lot of feedlots right in our area that will either take them to 900 pounds or they'll take them to finish. And otherwise they're going down into Kansas with a lot of these, or Missouri to fatten.
Yeah. Well, high cattle prices, and maybe your guys out west don't like to hear this, but here in our part of the country, we're about 5 miles from Iowa, and just in the very northwest corner of Iowa is Lyon and Sioux County, which have the highest animal population of any other counties in the state of Iowa. And high cattle prices also help the pork prices, and it also helps the poultry prices as well. Because if beef gets a little bit too expensive in the store, as you alluded to earlier in this segment, a lot of times they'll switch over to a pork ribeye or pork chops, or they'll go to another type of protein.
They will. And I go, we got a great grocery store right here in Bowman, but all of a sudden I'm walking through there the other day and I never look at prices. I'm going to eat it or I'm going to drink milk. I'm going to just buy it. But I walked by and it was pork steak for $2.05 a pound.
Yep.
And so I bought a package of them and they're good. So you're looking at $2.20 a pound, whatever it was for a pork steak. And I'm just impressed. I do like pork. I used to raise them, but it's just funny how now I kind of notice the difference between beef and pork and chicken. And I'm not a big chicken guy. I like wings with a glass of beer or something. But other than that, that's all I like there. But you get into the pork, I do like that. And but you still get me to a steak, and I'll take that anytime I'm coming off a good corn-fed beef.
I think you see that worldwide. I think that's why you see in some of these foreign countries, especially U.S. beef or a Canadian grown animal is a premium in so many other countries, is for that very reason. It's just simply the taste.
Right. Yeah. And, we deal with it all the time, but this one here, I think we're kind of in it for hopefully the long run. I want to see these producers get helped out. I mean, they've taken the brunt of, they don't get the government payments like the farmers do. We talked about that here the other day at one of our other meetings, and the ranchers are pretty conservative, self-sustaining, but we like to see this high price because now they're finally getting paid for their work. Just like these guys selling bulls or replacement heifers or bred heifers, it is nice to see that they're finally getting paid.
Yeah, it allows our cattlemen to get caught up with the rest of agriculture, because the row crop guys did pretty darn good for quite a while, and we're seeing some adjustments to that right now. But it is refreshing to see our cattlemen doing well and making good money and being able to get caught up. They're an integral part of agriculture, and we always want to see our cattlemen and our animal producers do very well. Hey folks, this is Chris Bair. I'm the host of the Legacy of Agriculture. We're coming down to the end of our second segment, the Legacy of Agriculture. Jim Sabe is my guest today, and we're going to be right back with a commercial break.
Hi, this is Jasmine at Pfeiffer's Auction Realty and Land Management. Pfeiffer's offers multiple ways to bid and buy at our equipment and land auctions. You can bid online, in person, or place pre-bids before the sale even starts. By providing convenient bidding platforms, we make sure that you can buy the items or parcels you want the way you want to. Visit Pfeiffers.com to see a complete list of our auctions. When it comes to bidding, go with Pfeiffer's. Nobody does it better.
Folks, this is Chris Bair, your host of the Legacy of Agriculture. We're in our third segment for this week, and I appreciate Jim Sabe for taking time out of his busy schedule. Jim, you grew up very, very rural, and one of the things that people don't understand about rural is how rural it really is in your part of the country. Years ago, one of my very best friends invited me. At the time I was living down in Nebraska, and he says, I'm going to see a customer out in western North Dakota, eastern Montana, and I want you to ride along with me. And I spent a fair amount of time in western North Dakota. Rural means rural. What was that like growing up where, some neighbors are 10, 15, 20 miles apart from each other?
Yes, they are. It was a great way of growing up. We lived right at the ranch that my great grandfathers homesteaded, grandfather and grandmother homesteaded in 1906, 1907. We've got a lot of longevity on the place. And so to prelude that whole story is my great grandfather and his three other brothers came over from Norway. And when they got to Ellis Island, they came from a very small town in Norway. And their last name was Johnson. Now, this is in our family chronicles, and they said they looked in the book in Ellis Island, and there's 100 and some pages or more of Johnsons. So they switched their name and it was pronounced back then Sabe. And Sabe was the name of their church that they came from in Norway. So when they got there, they went all over the United States, but my great-grandfather settled down in Callender, Iowa, and we could have been living in Iowa our whole life, but he was a buggy maker. He was a mayor of Callender, Iowa, and then the doctor told him he should move to a dry climate because of the rheumatism, back then. That's what they called it, rheumatism. So they got on a train, and he had a lot of friends in our area from Norway that moved south of Reeder and south of Scranton and Gascoigne. So he got on the train to Dickinson and walked down there. Which is 80 miles from Dickinson to my place, or our ranch. And he walked down there, claimed his homestead, and started having them ship stuff out there. And then his wife came. But in 1906, the winter of 1906, it was open, warm winter. They lived in a tent. And it was so warm, what they wrote that in their diaries, that a lot of days they didn't even need a coat in December, January, February. It was that warm. So we had global warming back then, in 1906, if you want to look at it that way. But started our ranch, and from there is my grandpa took over, and my dad took over, and I took over, and my daughter, who's running cattle on the ranch, running on the place, is the 5th generation. And now my grandsons will be the 6th generation on our ranch in southwest North Dakota. We grew up right next to a town of Haley, North Dakota. And that town grew because the river was by there, and they thought the railroad was going to come by there. So the town grew to, 250 people, which was huge. Well, then the railroad chose 12 miles north of town, or north of Haley. And so the town kind of died out, and our church is still going down there, our little Lutheran church. We still have services there, but our family stayed there, and my dad had 3 brothers, and my dad stayed on the ranch, and I was on the ranch and farmed, and so that's kind of, I rode a bus. I can say this now, but we rode the school bus to town, and from, we lived 12 miles south, so about 13 miles south of town, all the way to Scranton. We had a bus of 6. It said capacity of 62 on the thing in there. It was standing room only. There was that many kids. I had a lot of neighbors that had 9, 12 kids. And when I say neighbors, they're 8, 9 miles away. But when you get to town, boom. It was standing room only. Now there's, I think, 5 kids south of town that go to school. And now my kids bought a place north up by Amadon, North Dakota, Scott Bachmeyer's area, but they bought a place there. And so they're running both of them, the one down south and then the one where we're at. But it was fun being in a small town of 200. Scranton was 400 at one point when the coal mine was going. And now when the coal mine left, we sit there, we got 250 people. Scranton Equity is one of the largest co-ops in the upper Midwest. I believe they have close to 50 employees. Plus, we still have a K through 12 school. But it was fun to be able to come to town. We had a lot of things back then, and we took a lot of things for granted. I've never been to a big town before. I remember planning a trip to Bismarck. Took a month for my parents to plan that. Now sometimes I'm there 3 times a week. It just was, we're a long ways. Right now we're still 80 miles away from a Walmart, which is kind of nice. But, we sit down here and I take everything for granted. We got things right here in Bowman and Scranton, and I like supporting our local businesses, using them. But you grow up here, you get very appreciative of the way of life. It's a slower pace out here than what you see elsewhere in the country. So we've had a lot of fun as kids growing up. The schooling was great. I had the second largest class to go through our school, at class of 36 kids. Now they're graduating 10 to 12 every year, but it was just fun to be a part of that. And like I said, we took it for granted. There was times where we had such bad winters in 77, 78, 79, that there was no school. Well, I shouldn't say that. The roads are closed for that long. And I'd ride snowmobile to school every day. It's 12 miles to town. And finally I'd stay in town. And there was an old motel in town. We'd all stay there, and everybody from down south, and ride that. And then I ride the snowmobile home on weekends. But it's something you don't see now. I mean, weather like we had the other day at 25 below and the wind blowing, we didn't know what wind chill was. We still had to do chores. We still went to school. I don't remember many days of not missing school because of the coldness. It was all because of the roads were all blowed in. And we had to have National Guard out there for 3 years in a row moving snow for us. Now we have the ability to move it with our own payloaders and stuff like that. So it was a great time. We farmed, we sold certified Durham wheat and farmed there and had that. And then we run 150 cows most of the time. And it was just a fun life that you just we'll probably never get to experience that again.
We got about 45 seconds left. I did not know that there was a coal mine close to Scranton. Is it still an active coal mine?
Nope. It shut down in the 80s, and they say there's still enough coal there for 125 years, but somehow EPA didn't like what was there. But now there's a feedlot on top of that coal mine, and a 10,000 head facility feedlot. So that's what's out there right now.
I did not know that. See, at the Legacy of Agriculture, we learn something new on every episode, Jim.
It is. And then, we miss that mine because that was a big part of our community with 50 people employed out there, 75, whatever it was. And so that was a big part of our community.
Hey, folks, we're coming down to the end of our third segment of the Legacy of Agriculture. My good friend and coworker, Jim Sabe, is my guest, talking about being raised in the very rural western North Dakota, and we're going to be right back with our fourth and final segment.
Hi, this is Jasmine at Pfeiffer's Auction Realty and Land Management. Pfeiffer's offers multiple ways to bid and buy at our equipment and land auctions. You can bid online, in person, or place pre-bids before the sale even starts. By providing convenient bidding platforms, we make sure that you can buy the items or parcels you want the way you want to. Visit Pfeiffer's.com to see a complete list of our auctions. When it comes to bidding, go with Pfeiffer's. Nobody does it better.
Folks, this is Chris Bair, your host of the Legacy of Agriculture. We're in our fourth and final segment. Jim Sabe from Western North Dakota, self-made man, has joined us talking a little bit about growing up in Western North Dakota. Jim, in our third segment, you said something that really caught my interest, and I love history. I love agricultural history in particular. I drive my kids nuts because I call them city kids, and I get talking about agriculture and history, and my kids will look at me and say, "Dad, stop it. Just quit it." But in 1906, your great-grandfather took a train to Dickinson, North Dakota, walked 80 miles to the south to stake his claim and to start ranching. Lived in a tent all winter because of the warm Chinook winds, that come into your part of the country, how do you start farming or how do you start ranching in 1906?
You
I
know,
mean, now and let me say this before you answer this, because when you start ranching in 1906, there's not a lot of mechanization. I mean, the tractor, yeah, there were some steam tractors, there was some tillage available, but how do you do it?
you know, and I've asked that too, and I'm really glad that my great aunt recorded the history of our family before she passed away, and we've got it all documented in a book. But when they got out here, he had stuff then put on the train from Callender, Iowa, to Dickinson, and he made 10 trips. He'd leave it sit up in Dickinson. He'd take every, I don't know how long it was, but 10 trips to get that down to Haley, North Dakota. And so that took all summer, and that's in the book from May to, September. And first thing they did is during that summer, in between waiting for this stuff to come from Iowa, they started building a sod house. And him and one of the people that he knew from Norway would come over and help get that done. So they're building the sod house, and then of course you have no livestock, so he bought a called an oxen in our book, but he bought that and hooked because he was a buggy and carriage maker. He made a wagon and hooked it onto this ox and drove it back and forth to Dickinson that way. And I don't care who you are. You tell some kid nowadays, this is what you're doing. They'd tell you you're nuts, but they didn't know any better. And he wanted to make a better life for his family. And then the rest of the family, once they got the sod house done, came out, his son and daughter and with the wife, and they started building a little barn and started, they walked 2 miles to get water to the place because that guy had a well over there. And so you look at what they went through, and he still never had a plow. He had to get a plow the next year so he could get a little garden started, because they were just kind of going to live off the wildlife for the first year or two. And so they got a garden going, but he bought this plow at the local store in Scranton and started with that and built it into what our place is today. And I say, thank you to those people that worked like that. And every time I'm selling some land, I want to know the history of that place, when we're doing a land sale. And, some people don't know the history and what people went through just to get started out here in rural America, whether you're in Montana or North Dakota. But, we have a different way of life out here. And it's really different. It's slower, but our farming practices are totally different than what is in your area. Our rotations, it takes 10 to 12 to 20 acres just to raise one cow and calf for the year. We're in a drought area. And then you look at how we're farming, and things are really different, but we adapt very well. And as human beings, you have to, or you're not going to make it.
One of the things that this was years ago, I was sitting with a group of people, and they were talking about the biggest fear that the Indians and that the earlier settlers had back at the turn of the century was fire.
Yes.
A lot of people don't realize that it's such a grass-rich area, and it's very common for the wind to blow 30, 40 miles an hour. And if a fire got started out there, there was nothing to stop it. There wasn't mountain ranges, there wasn't rocks. And that was a huge fear of our Native Americans. It was a huge fear of those settlers because it'd sweep through their cattle herd, and in 10 minutes, you could completely lose everything that you've worked for. Jim, tell us a little bit about that.
And we've got that documented too, but there was no fire districts back then and what happened. But I remember my great grandfather's biggest fear was fire, just like you talked about. And they were talking there about a fire that was coming from the west and northwest, of course, northwest winds. And I think within a half a mile, the wind had switched and pushed it a different direction, and it went right around our place. And now, where do you go? I mean, you can't hide in a hole. I mean, maybe you'd like to dig a root cellar, but there's no way to go. But fire was always the biggest thing, and that's the first thing you saw along these old farmsteads was a fire break. they'd get their plows out and go around their farmstead, and it's called a fire break. And that's what they did, was to prevent that fire coming through and burning everything up. And of course, we have no trees out in western North Dakota. And that's why a lot of times you'll wonder why we farm differently out here. But there's a lot of things when we used to farm every other strip in 20-acre strips and called strip farming, and a lot of it was due to the fire, but the other thing is part of the drought, which is part of having fires. So we can say conserve moisture in that summer fallow. So I remember as a kid summer fallowing all the time. I thought that was the dumbest thing I ever thought. Well, all of a sudden now we're into no-till, so we don't need to summer fallow. But now we got fire worries again, like this last summer, the big one up at Tioga and Ray, North Dakota, that, people lost their lives, a lot of livestock, but I think it burned up 8,000 acres or something up there. But we had one right outside of Scranton this summer, and that burned up a lot of acres. And because everybody no-tills, it went right through that stubble, right through the pastures. What saved us was the big discs that farmers have nowadays. The firemen couldn't get this thing to even slow down, but these big discs that everybody had, we had a bunch of farmers in that saved our area. Now it's just east of Scranton, so it wasn't going to affect the town any, but we had other towns that could be affected. So things have changed, but fires are still number one thing that we worry about. As a kid, I didn't hardly shoot any fireworks off because we couldn't. It was so dry. So we'd go to town or whatever, get to see a few, or go down to the Black Hills and see them. But it was one of those things. Fire is on your mind all the time.
I know that earlier this fall you had texted me some pictures of the devastation, and I don't want to go into graphic detail, but one thing that people don't understand about grass fires or forest fires is the toll that it takes on both domestic animals and on our wildlife. It will take and destroy an animal just in the matter of seconds.
It will, and a lot of it, to get that smoke inhalation right away, and it was blowing so bad here down in Scranton area that the fire trucks couldn't even see themselves out there, and we've had some problems that way. But when you think about the wildlife out there, you don't even know how many didn't make it through there. And then all of a sudden you get to the cattle, like up north at Ray and Tioga, there was a lot of cattle there that couldn't even get out of it.
Hey, Jim, unfortunately, we're at the end of our second segment. Folks, we're going to continue into a bonus round. Unfortunately, we're out of time here at WNAX, but for a bonus round, join us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or the legacyofagriculture.com website. We're going to be right back with a bonus round with Jim Sabe.
Hi, this is Jasmine at Pfeiffer's Auction Realty and Land Management. Pfeiffer's offers multiple ways to bid and buy at our equipment and land auctions. You can bid online, in person, or place pre-bids before the sale even starts. By providing convenient bidding platforms, we make sure that you can buy the items or parcels you want the way you want to. Visit Pfeiffer's.com to see a complete list of our auctions. When it comes to bidding, go with Pfeiffer's. Nobody does it better.
Jim, we finished up the WNX radio show, and we were actually mid-sentence or mid-conversation talking about some of the dangers of western North Dakota and western South Dakota and the history. And I completely intrigued with your great-grandfather and how he got your ranch started out in the Scranton area of North Dakota. One of the things that you said that was really interesting is that they lived in a sod house. And I didn't know this, but back in the day, I always thought that a canopy over your bed inside of a house was a luxury for rich people, but actually it's not. And the reason is because people put blankets and canopies over their beds. And that came from the years that people lived in sod houses. Yep. Because in sod houses, the mice and the rats and the snakes would everything would burrow in to that sod house, and the heat rises, right? The heat rises, and those animals would come in, and it actually kept dirt and straw and the varmints off from the bed for a minute.
For a minute, yeah. And what's really interesting is, we have the old homestead place marked with a marker there, but in the town of Haley, which there's only one person that lives there now, but the church is still open. But there is a sod house that is still there and being lived in. And my daughter, when she got done with college, it was vacant, and she actually lived in that sod house for about a year. And now it's, it's got the regular walls in it, but it's like 1.5 feet wide, the walls. But it's a sod house, and it's marked in the history of Bowman County that I think Haley was the oldest town in Bowman County, established in 1898. So you look at that. She lived in my great grandfather lived in a sod house, and my daughter came back, and not intentionally, but that was the only place to live. Lived in a sod house in Haley, North Dakota. So you see that, but boy, I tell you what, the work they had to do to get that sod house in place, and you see a lot of things. They'd find all these rocks because there's no trees, so you couldn't build anything, but they'd find all these rocks and make rock barns or rock buildings out of them, or rock part of the house. And we have a lot of petrified wood out here, and guys love it, and we can see people come here and pick up our rock, and but it's just one of those things. And I have a lot of relatives that were in the Astoria, South Dakota, Clear Lake, South Dakota area. That's where my great grandmother or my grandmother came from, was that area. So when we go down there, it was just, as a kid, it was just, my eyes would wide open to how people farm down there. And I always thought, why can't we do that down here? Well, Dad kept reminding me of moisture. It takes moisture, and when you only get 10 to 12 inches of moisture a year in Southwest North Dakota, it's a little bit more difficult to grow those crops and to grow the grass.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And as we went through our earlier segments, Jim, one of the things that kept coming to mind in talking about the history of North Dakota is once the heat set in the summertime, or once the cold set in the wintertime, there was no relief until Mother Nature gave you that relief.
Right.
How many times do we complain because we go and do an auto start on our pickup when it's 10 degrees below zero and a 30-mile-an-hour wind in the dead of January, and our pickup isn't quite warm enough for us when we get inside, when we go outside from the grocery store,
right,
or from the parts store, or from the restaurant, because our pickup's not warm enough. And we really do take for granted the niceties that we have.
Yeah. And, and I really do now, but I remember growing up, there was winters where Dad would push snow all winter or all day. And then finally, at the end of the day, finally get enough to get out there to put hay out for the cows. Well, as a kid, our loader tractor was a co-op number 3 tractor with a F11 loader on with a comfort cover. And, and no one really had much. They had M's or old John Deere tractors and international tractors, but that's what everybody had. But it was sitting in a lean-to, and Dad would go out and start the NIPCO heater and have it plugged in all night, start the NIPCO heater, and then get ready to go feed. And I remember, man, we'd have the best coveralls in the day. We bought the Arctic Cat snowmobile suits. I mean, which we had a dealer in town, and he must have sold out of them every year. But all of a sudden, we're sitting in some comfort when you're in that. But then you get outside and sit in that thing for 7-8 hours a day. It wasn't much of a tractor. You always had chains on. Now we got front wheel assist. We've got payloaders. These people went through, and I don't like cussing, but pure hell to do what they loved, to do what they wanted to do. And you look at that, whether it was farming or ranching, and I remember it was loose hay or square bales when I was a kid. And I hated, we put up 20,000 square bales a year, and I just dreaded that. I didn't mind doing it, but when it come to picking them up, yeah, I did.
The price that has been paid by our parents and our grandparents and our great grandparents, so that we can enjoy some of the niceties that we have, we just truly do not understand what they went through so that we could have what we have here today.
Yeah.
It's truly amazing. And I have a deep respect. The longer I do the legacy of agriculture, and the more stories I hear and about people's history and what they went through, was truly mind-boggling. And the amount of history that's out there. Well, Jim, you and I both have better get back to work. and earn a little bit of money so we can keep doing these radio shows, right?
Yes, and I appreciate you having me on this morning. It's been fun visiting about the history of our place, and you know, how my grandsons now are the 6th generation coming on that place. It's just something. It's kind of fun to listen and recount everything. You don't ever think about that a lot, and I tend to now when I get to this age, the recant kind of the old stories and try to keep the kids. And I'm glad we have a book that was wrote about our family, and so it's been fun, and I appreciate you having me on, and I look forward to seeing you at one of our next auctions.
Thank you very much, Jim. This is Chris Bair, your host of the Legacy of Agriculture. We'll be back next week.
In it here now, I'm gonna do now. I'm gonna been on here now. Who bid $500,000 bid?
We hope you've enjoyed today's edition of The Legacy of Agriculture with Chris Bair, sponsored by Pfeiffer's Auction, Realty, and Land Management. Call Pfeiffer's at 605-836-2277.